All right, A New Hope. So this one is one of the ones that I'm reviewing that I really don't know what to say because A New Hope is a Star Wars movie that has been talked to death. Like Star Wars to me is interesting when it kind of changes stuff up. And not saying I don't love A New Hope, because I do. I think A New Hope is incredible, but looking at the first film released in the Star Wars universe, like, this one has been talked about to death, as has Empire and Return of the Jedi. The original trilogy is sacred to a lot of people. So looking at A New Hope, like, it's hard to figure out really what to say besides I love it. I think that it is a great movie. I think it's fantastic, and it is one of the best Star Wars movies, I think, overall, out of all of them. The original trilogy, rewatching them all, because, spoiler, I've already rewatched, like, up to episode 7. I'm going to rewatch Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker tonight. But I rewatched them all, and looking at A New Hope, it is really one of the best ones. And looking at it in terms of the budget they had, that George Lucas had, it's genuinely surprising how this one was technically an independent film, and it was bought out to Fox, and it was released and became a juggernaut. Like, it was just one of those movies that blew up, and it was such a coincidence, because I think they didn't really expect this movie to be like this, to, like, the first Star Wars movie made, to be like this, to be released and give such praise and become a franchise of 3 different trilogies and spin-offs and books and games and everything. Like, Star Wars is one of the biggest franchises ever, and it's genuinely awesome to see the fact that we get this first movie, and everything came from this one, because it's the first one released. So looking at it from the budget, it's weird, because this is the only one in the whole 3 trilogies that I think aesthetically doesn't always match the whole series. Because I know you got the prequel trilogy with more CGI, and then the sequel trilogy is a mixture, and the original trilogy is practical, but it's weird to see this one, because it was such a low budget that there are shots where you're like, oh, okay, it's definitely not the same as any other movie in the franchise. Even like Empire and Return of the Jedi, like, they don't have the same effects sometimes. Like, Empire and Jedi feel way closer in terms of effects, practical effects, to this one, because this one had a lower budget. There's a lot of shots where it'll be a quick shot of something. Like, for example, whenever the Death Star is destroyed, it's just one shoot, boom, it's just gone. And in every other Star Wars movie, in Return of the Jedi, it's a little longer whenever it explodes. In A New Hope, or in Rogue One, you see, like, the effects on the ground of it. So, like, it's funny to see in A New Hope the explosion of Alderaan on the Death Star and the Death Star getting blown up are so quick, as opposed to the other films. But effects like that, I think, are interesting in this one alone, because this one is definitely a lower budget. And also watching shots where, like, they'll be in space, and it's like, you can tell in space that it's just like a black line with, like, white dots everywhere, like, that are made. Like, it isn't like Empire or Return of the Jedi, where it feels like there's still probably the same effect, but they had more time and more budget to do it. So it's interesting to see that. And also with George Lucas redoing all the movies, like the first 6, like, adding stuff in, it's hard to tell nowadays, but, like, if you watch the original version, it's definitely a difference between the two. But yeah, effects wise, it's pretty different than the other films, and that's saying something, because all 3 trilogies are visually different. Like I said, the original trilogy is practical. Prequel trilogy is a lot more CGI from the 2000s, and so some of them are dated, like Attack of the Clones. And then the sequel trilogy is a mixture, because the CGI is better. So it's weird to see this one where it's really low budget practical, but it just doesn't always feel like it's connected to the universe in terms of, like, the style, because to be fair, it's their first movie. They didn't expect much of it, and they made what they could. So, I mean, it's not like I'm saying the movie's bad because of that. It's definitely not in any way. It's just interesting to see visually difference between this one and every other film in the franchise. But But New Hope, also the thing about A New Hope too is that out of all the Star Wars movies, it's the most simple. Literally, it's just about droids go on a planet. The Empire's after them. Luke Skywalker joins Obi-Wan, and then Han Solo and Chewie and Leia, and they go on the Death Star, and then Luke blows up the Death Star, and they save the day. And that's all. And you can sum it up that quick. This is the easiest one to sum up, as opposed to like, say, like Phantom Menace or like Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker, where it's like there's a lot to go on. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens, and in this one it's just very, very simple. And George Lucas really used the ideas of old film serials and Flash Gordon, like stuff like that he watched in his youth to make this movie a movie kind of like a mixture of things that he was nostalgic for, like the 30-year cycle. Like he thought of the 50s whenever it, or the 40s and 50s whenever it was in the 70s, whenever this movie was made in 1977. So it's cool to see that. And I haven't, to be fair, I haven't seen a lot of old film serials at all. Like, I don't think I've seen any. So it's Star Wars is that for me. Like, that's where I've gotten imagery from. But if I watch some of those, I probably would understand, like, where these came from, like, more so. But Star Wars is a thing that I've watched ever since I was a child. Like, so it's something that I wonder if I watch some of those old film serials, I'll see some similarities to this, or to most of the films. I know that all the films kind of have references to other films, but I really think it's interesting with this one, just how old school it feels. And like I said, it's a very simple story. The characters are likable. Luke Skywalker's likable after being kind of whiny, but I mean, he is like father like son though. But Luke Skywalker doesn't have as much of an excuse to be whiny. He just wanted to get power converters, and Anakin Skywalker's mother was killed, and like he's like mad about it. So like it's funny to see the difference between Luke being kind of spoiled and Anakin like loses family, loses friends, and like he cries over it. But like I feel like that's more legit than Luke wanting power converters. Funny little just thing. I noticed that whenever I watched The New Hope, I'm like, man, you're just really whiny, but not in the same way Anakin is. And honestly, if I had to choose between characters, like I'd like Anakin more as a character overall. Luke I like the most in The Last Jedi, but in the original trilogy he's great, but he's not the most interesting character. He's very simplistic, and I'd rather have Anakin if I had to choose between the two characters from their respective trilogies. But Luke's fine here. Han Solo's great, Leia's great, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan is great. It's cool to see just, again, how simple it is, and just to show these characters quickly join together. And George Lucas always did this in a great way, where like characters were built together and developed together, but then separated. And like I like how in this movie they're mostly together towards the end of the movie. Like they connect together through circumstance, but it works really well and it blends really well. But again, there's some weird things from this movie, like Princess Leia. Like Carrie Fisher at first talks in a British accent, but then she never does in the whole rest of the franchise. Like stuff like that, or like stuff like that just cracks me up in this movie. Like I said, it's a fantastic movie, it truly is, but it's just so funny to see the differences in this one as opposed to every other film, because I feel like George Lucas, after this film, he really tried to make sure everything connected in a really fluid way, like in the originals and the prequels. Like he really put an effort into that, because like I said, this is the first movie and they didn't expect much from it. They expected it to fail, so it's like you could see some errors in this movie, but it's like it doesn't matter that much. But I just think it's funny to point out like stuff like that. But I think as this first movie was released, I think it's great. I really do like the characters, how simplistic they are. Like they have characteristics that are simplistic enough that I enjoy. They're not the most complex, especially in this one. This is the least complex Star Wars movie. Like it's the most simple. These characters are very simple. They have simple wants and needs, and they're effective and they work. But I just feel like with the rest of the movies, like they're way more interesting or more complex characters. I don't want to say interesting; they're more complex, and I do enjoy character arcs more in the rest of the movies. Even though Luke has a great character arc in this, where he's a whiny kid and then he goes and saves the galaxy. Like I do like that. I do like how Han Solo has an arc where he starts as this character who is selfish. All he wants is for himself to get out of debt, to get away from Jabba the Hutt because he owes Jabba. And then at the end, he like stays with the group, and I like that he joins them, and I like how he stays with them. And that reminds me of like they do the same thing in like Last Jedi, where like Finn learns a lesson and he realizes that he can't run away forever. He's going to have to be part of this cause, and for the greater good. So they always do this in these Star Wars movies, but I really like Han Solo's arc as well. And Princess Leia, it's funny because Princess Leia is a badass in this, and she's fun, but the only thing she really has is like a character arc, or kind of arc, is like she has to deal with Tarkin and Vader, and then they blow up her home planet and everybody is killed that she knew on Alderaan and grew up with. And it's kind of like at the end she's kind of in the sidelines, like she kind of just is there with everybody else, but she doesn't get like an emotional like payoff, which is funny. I just realized that whenever I'm thinking about it, like, you know, she doesn't get a full emotional payoff in this movie. She loses everybody, and that's it. So she's the weak link, I guess, character-wise in terms of the three. And I'm not saying that's an argument as like, oh, they can't write women. I'm just saying like that it gets weird. Like they just didn't give her that much of an arc in this movie. I mean, she does have, like in Return of the Jedi, I love her and Luke's arc where like they finally, like they come full circle with them realizing their family and all that. But in this first one, Leia's the weakest link out of the three in terms of like characters and what happens with them. Like she has a sad moment, but that's pretty much it. Not much to that. And funny enough, rewatching this, I said for a while, last year, before Rise of Skywalker came out, well, not even last year, it was a year before, 2019. It's 2021 now, so it's been over a year. So 2019, when Rise of Skywalker was coming out, I rewatched every Star Wars movie, and I remembered thinking New Hope was so boring, and I honestly feel really dumb saying that, because rewatching it again, man, I was so enthralled the whole time. And maybe it's just because the first 6 Star Wars movies I have seen millions of times, so maybe it's just because I watched it so much in the same period of time in the past couple of years, because Star Wars has been big the past couple of years, with Disney releasing all the movies, so maybe I just was a little bored with it at that time period. But now, rewatching it again, I really do love A New Hope. I think it's one of the best, ranking-wise. And like I said, it's just, there's not much else to say. Like, I think it's just a really fantastically done movie, but just looks aesthetically different slightly to the other films. Characters are great, action's great, pacing is great. It's a very interesting movie. It's a good mystery movie. Even though I love the prequels, I do like the mystery aspect of this, like going into it. But Star Wars as a whole, every episode is meant to be its own episode. Like, you of course need to watch, if you're watching a trilogy, you need to watch all 3 to understand what happens, but I feel like with Star Wars, they're like old film serials where they have episodes where it's like, this one thing happens in this whole movie, it's resolved, and then it goes to the next movie, or it's somewhat not resolved. Like, for example, in Last Jedi or Empire, like, they have, like, cliffhangers, but looking at it from that way, like, they're still self-contained, each movie. Like, each movie is still self-contained, where they have a full story, and it's resolved almost by the end with a few loose threads. Because, of course, if it's a trilogy, you gotta have a trilogy. Like, you can't just end one. But it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings movies, where, like, you watch one, you're satisfied, but then you watch the next one, and you're satisfied, and then you watch the next one, and you're satisfied. But it's like you can watch one movie and understand completely what the movie is about. You didn't have to see all of them to understand. That's what they do great with these Star Wars movies. Like, the people who made them, they're great at being self-contained in each one. So like I said, just a really great one. I really love A New Hope. Rewatching it again. really, not much else to say. That's it. That's all I'm going to say on A New Hope. Is what else can be said? Like, it's a movie that's been out for 43 years. So, I mean, there's not much else to say that everybody said. So, love it. Next up is Empire, of course. So, see you guys in the next video. Take care.